Hey guys, Dr. Stitzel here. Wanted to do the full Keynesian model for those of you that wanted to see it, just so we can work the whole thing in preparation for your quiz at the end of the week. So let's again remember where we started. What if aggregate expenditure were just equal to consumption? So we don't have, remember our full model, right? Aggregate expenditure C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Okay, all things that we're quite familiar with by now at this point in the class. Okay, so if consumption is on this curve, where is our equilibrium point? This, of course, is what we've already done in the class, so I'll go through this somewhat quickly. And we know, this is the important part, we know that at that level of income, so I'll mark it down here, Y1, if aggregate expenditure is completely made out of consumption, consumption is equal to, the aggregate expenditure is equal to consumption in the equilibrium, then we end up with a level of zero savings, okay? So what happens if we add some level of investment? What happens if we add some level of investment? So aggregate expenditure is C plus I, okay? So now I've got this interesting case. Equilibrium is point B, and it comes down like so, and that's income level 1, right? I'm sorry, that should be 2. That second amount of income. Well, consumption is now here. So consumption is up a little bit, right? If we wanted to make this whatever point B prime. B prime there is the level of consumption. It's up a little bit, but the total aggregate expenditure is equal to the income, but the savings less the income must be some number. Let's say in this case that that's 100, just to make this everything nice and simple. And so investment looks like this. And remember, we're making an assumption for simplicity's sake that investment is not related to income, and so it's a constant number like that. Now we can see we have the components to find our savings curve. Now we have the components to find our savings curve. Let me make this something we can work with here. Something like that, okay? So there's our savings curve. Now why is that, okay? Because consumption fell short of aggregate expenditure by that amount. That distance there needs to explain this amount here. So our savings is then positively related to income, even though investment is not, okay? Now, what happens if there's government spending in the model? Government spending in the model. So now, aggregate expenditure is consumption plus investment plus government spending. Well, naturally, many of our same points here when income is at level 3, we're going to do the same kind of analysis. So here's point C. Now, what's interesting, there, call it C prime just to stay with the convention, is the level of consumption. Has consumption gone up? Yes, but now there's a greater gap right here. And what is that level? That level is obviously this level here. So obviously I don't need to keep adding numbers here, because you get the point. This is government spending. So it's just for hypothetical sake, let's say that's another 100 for a total of 200 spending in this model, right? So there's Y3. So consumption's gone up a little bit, all right? But we have this relationship. So what's driving these two things, right? So here's an important place to sort of stop maybe for a moment and say, Why is this an interesting thing, right? Because if consumption falls short of the total aggregate expenditure and yet we are in equilibrium, something had to explain that. If we're in this initial situation, that second situation, that difference right there is investment. So savings has to be something about investment. Well, this is obvious, right? You save money, it goes in the banks, the firms come to get it so that they can borrow money so they can invest it in their firms. Now you see how savings and investment are related. How about government spending? Well, as we've already said in this class, right, your taxes are often partially paid for by a reduction in savings. Okay, so say you make $100, you consume 90, you save 10. Suddenly, here comes a tax bill for $10. Are you going to save 10 still and consume 80? Probably not. You'll do something like spend 85 and save 5. Now the difference is 10. That's where you are going to put your, that's how you're going to pay for your government spending. Okay, relatively straightforward. Now, what we want to do next, obviously, is we want to explore. Now, these are parallel lines. They look pretty good on here, but they're definitely intentionally, all of these trying to be parallel for the reasons that we've discussed in the full-length lecture video. So now I've got the whole thing here, C plus I plus G. Now, exports less imports, right? So remember what we're saying. Exports, that's one of our components of aggregate expenditure, etc. Okay, so here's point D. What happens? We have income level 4 because we have a higher level of injections. Consumption's still going up a little bit, right? Consumption's still going up a little bit because the income is rising, but the gap keeps widening here. You know, from each point, keeps getting a little wider and a little wider. Now, exports less imports. We're going to talk about this a bunch more later on in the class, but obviously some of the same mechanisms that play with businesses are going to drive these kind of things here. So we're going to have exports less imports. Remember, it's net, right? So this is actually that whole term here. Don't let that be too confusing to you. And let's say, just for hypothetical sake, doesn't matter what this number is, but just because I drew all the lines roughly the same distance apart, we'll say that's 300. Now you've got a savings curve fit to the differences in all of these new aggregate expenditures, these new injections into the model, and we have the full Keynesian model.